Hi everyone, so today I'm going to be talking about weather and how it relates to birding. So when I first started out, and if you asked me what a good day looks like, I go with something like this. So sunny, fairly warm, no wind, as in my mind that's what an ideal birding day looked like. Now, 4 years later, lots changed, and in particular my approach to birding and weather. So, if you gave me an option of 2 days in May, and said I could only pick one to go birding, which one would I pick? The one option looks like this. So, for the sake of argument, let's say it's sunny, calm, no wind, relatively warm. And the other option looks like this. So, we have a massive rain front coming out of the south. It's going to be cold and miserable all day. So, which day am I going to pick? Well, I'm actually going with the second option. And I'll explain in a second. I'm not actually crazy. And there is a reason for this. So this is what a basic weather app looks like. So you have things like cloud cover, temperature, basic wind, but you're kind of missing the big picture of what's going on. Now when I'm looking for birding days, I look at these kind of things. So wind, precipitation, temperature, and pressure. I look at how all of them interact and how they play out, and then I decide about which day I'm picking to go birding. This map shows wind, strong southwest wind coming all the way off the Gulf Coast into Ontario. Now, as you can see, it kind of wraps around here, and this is what they call a low pressure system. So, for those who don't know, low barometric pressure, the air flows inward, and high pressure, the air flows outwards. So, if we think about Ontario, high pressure typically is associated with periods of like blue skies, relatively calm weather, no storms, and low pressure is associated with turbulent weather, strong like south winds, rain, that kind of thing. There's different types of low pressure. Some come off the Gulf Coast and shoot up towards the Maritimes. Some come out of the Midwest and shoot up towards the Great Lakes, and others kind of start out west and move across the prairies. And they're not all created equally in terms of birding. Personally, I like these kind of Colorado Gulf lows. I'll explain why in a second, but first, I'd like to explain this. So if you look at a low pressure system, to the east and the south is this nice warm air. So warm front, south wind, generally more rain. And to the west and kind of to the north, you have a cold front. And here there's more northwest winds, cooler temperatures, and for birding, generally it's not as great. So if we look at this map, I just picked like a random date here back in March. Oh, I forgot to mention too, this is a site I use called windy.com. It's one of my favorites. But as you can see, to the north of the low pressure we have northwest winds, and to the south we have these nice south winds. So if you can picture that if the center of the low isn't here, and it's more towards eastern Ontario, New York, Maritimes, that means Ontario, specifically Bruce County, is going to be getting hit with these really strong northwest winds. So from a birding perspective, this means everything's going to be hunkered down. It may be good for a lake watch, but in general there's not going to be too much moving. Certainly not migrants. So when you're looking at lows, you want the center of it to be either over Ontario or to the west. So that means we're getting the warm front and the ideal migrating conditions for birds. Now, from a vagrant standpoint, low pressure is quite interesting, as the birds are kind of drawn into the center because they follow the wind. So that means you could be getting birds from out west, the east, the south, even northern Ontario. The conditions are right. So it makes it a really interesting piece of weather if you're going birding. Here's an example. You can see there is low pressure to the west of us, and the wind is southwest, but it's only coming out of places like Indiana, Illinois, Ohio. So we're not really getting birds off of the Gulf Coast or farther south. It will still be good birding, and things that are in this kind of area will be moving north, but it's not ideal. I'm just looking ahead here. This is in a few days, April 6th. And there's a small low pressure system over the Midwest. Fairly strong winds coming out of the Gulf all the way up into Ontario. So migrating birds love this kind of weather, as they can use the south wind as a tailwind, and it'll save them time and make it easier to migrate north. And important thing to note that I didn't mention before is I'm looking at 850 millibar height, which is kind of like a kilometer and a half up off the surface. And it's important to look that high up because the birds are migrating around a kilometer up off the surface. We tend to think of bird migration, or when you're first starting out, you tend to think of it as ground or the birds are just moving through the trees, but in reality they're really high up. And this goes for basically everything, like shorebirds, songbirds, ducks. So when you're thinking, oh, when's going to be a good night for a bird migration, you can look on the map and it'll show like even north wind, and you're thinking that's bad. And then you look at 850 millibar heights or whatever, and you can see there's strong south wind, so it can give you a totally different perspective. An important thing with lows to look at is they're often associated with rain. So sure, there may be nice winds coming all the way up off the Gulf Coast, Texas, into Ontario, but you have this big band of rain that's going to kind of shut things down. So when the migrating birds hit the rain, they tend to drop as they don't like to fly through it. So that means if there's a big blocking pattern of rain like this, we're not really going to get the full intensity of bird migration. Sure, things will still be like moving up out of Ohio or southern Ontario, and it could be a good day, but it's not going to be crazy. Just want to talk a bit about wind. So, disregarding pressure here. If you have southeast wind or southwest in the spring, it can kind of alter how you go birding and where you hit, at least in my perspective. So if I'm planning a birding day and I'm going to go out along the coast, if there's southwest wind, I'm going to concentrate along Lake Huron, so like Saugeen Shores, all the way up through Pike Bay. And if it's southwest, I'm going to concentrate along the Georgian Bay side, so Lions Head, Hope Bay, Cabot Head. As the birds are migrating, they're getting pushed towards the shore by either like southwest, southeast. And when daybreak hits, they don't want to be over the lake. So what this means is you get birds kind of stacked up along the coast. So if you pick the wind that's pushing towards the coast and you go to that shoreline, it can often be really productive for birds. So like a massive flocks of warblers, tanagers, etc. stacked up along there. And you can see days with like 400 warblers. You have to time it right, but it can be great. Due south wind's more of a mixed bag where everywhere's good. It's kind of hard to know where's going to be best. I've hit Tobermory on some of these days, and it's been insane for warblers and migrating songbirds. Now, I think most birders know the term fallout, and this is often from like the southern Ontario hotspots like Point Pelee, Rondo, Long Point, and birders will picture hundreds of warblers dripping off of trees at eye level. And fallouts are basically always associated with rain. So sure, we won't get the same numbers in Bruce County, or like that same 50 warblers in a tree at eye level, but we can still get really nice fallouts at times. Now, they are a rare occurrence. We may get one or two a spring, if that, and you really have to time it right and look at the weather maps in advance to going out, but here's a brief overview. So if the rain's all over southern Ontario, not just Bruce County, it won't be as great. You're more looking for bands of rain there going over the peninsula itself or southern Bruce County, because as I said before, the birds drop when they hit the rain. So if you look in the morning before you go out and see where that band of rain is, and you try to hit right along the edge, that can often be great birding. I know last year some birders went out by Kincardine right after a big front like this passed, and they had hundreds of warblers along the shoreline. Total insanity. So when you're looking, make sure the wind's kind of south. That can be like the most productive days. And you go right along the edge of the rain. And even regardless of if the rain's over Ontario, I encourage people to go out after the rain. And not at night even, like at my place here up by Mar. Some of the best days I've had in April, May have been days where it's raining all morning, then it lets up around noon, and I go outside and there's all these newly arrived birds that have just dropped out and they're coating the trees. So yeah, rain can definitely be a big part in picking days to go birding in May. I can't really mention birds in migration without mentioning Cornell's Birdcast. So this is a fairly new website they've put out, and they forecast migration intensity, and they go 3 days at a time, and they kind of predict where's going to be best and how many birds are going to be migrating. They use radar and predictions and weather, and they're generally pretty accurate. Unfortunately, they haven't come into Canada yet, but I think that's happening soon. They also have this map, which is a live migration map. So it uses radar, and this red line is sunset. So after dark, if you log on here, you can see arrows at all these radar stations pointing in the direction that birds are migrating. So this can be a great tool if you're looking in May. And like I said, it doesn't have Canada yet, but if you look at Ohio, Michigan, and look where those arrows are pointing, you can see, oh wow, there's massive numbers of birds moving north. And in general, that means the next day is going to be great. I started this recently. It's called Bruce County Weather Birding. It's kind of like a site off my main blog, Chronicles of a Bruce Birder. And basically what I'm doing is I'm forecasting migration for Bruce County. So I'll say when's going to be a good day, what I'm expecting. I follow weather systems. It's fairly new, but I'm planning to keep up with it through May. I have a list of newly arrived migrants. And I'll say like, hey, there's a big low pressure system coming. I bet stuff will be arriving around Kincardine, so keep your eyes open. Stuff like that. So keep your eyes on it. In summary, I'd like to say that low pressure is good, but it's kind of finicky, and you really have to watch how it plays out. So in general, you want it west of us or over us. You have to make sure there's no rain interrupting the path. And yeah, that's basically it.